Dear viewers of the TomPhoto channel, I've been using my Fuji XF 16 to 80mm f4 lens a lot recently. In fact, it's become my main lens these days, especially for travel. Please check out the link to my review video of this lens. Today I'm continuing to explore this lens and find its sweet spot at 16, 23, 35, 50 and 80mm focal lengths. I'll look at its overall sharpness, center sharpness and corner sharpness. The results were somewhat surprising to me, so let's get into it. Briefly, here's how I do the experiment. Feel free to skip to the next chapter if you don't care about it. I photograph a plywood board with the Fuji X-T30 from a tripod using the timer, electronic shutter, DR 100%, the optical image stabilization turned off and all special effects disabled. Only the bare bones and JPEG. I shoot each series of f-stops 3 times for each focal length, focusing once before each series and then switching focus to manual for the entire series. Of the 3 series, I retain the 2 sharpest ones and average these sharpness values. I measure photo sharpness using my own script. I've made this script public and also described my sweet spot measuring technique in separate videos. Please check out the links below. But without further ado, let's look at the overall sharpness graphs for all focal lengths. The widest angle is 16mm. To make sure I didn't run out of the plywood board I photographed, I was only about 60 to 70 centimeters from the board. With every subsequent focal length, I took a small step farther away from the plywood board until I was about 3 meters from it at the 80mm focal length. The f-stop versus sharpness graph for 16mm has a mountain shape with a peak at f8. The units are standardized sharpness values where all values in the series were divided by the highest value of the series, so the highest value is always 1. Here f8 seems to be the sweet spot. Up until f11, the overall sharpness is about the same as when the lens is fully open at f4. This is the sharpness graph for the 23mm focal length. We have a different shape now. There is a plateau of best sharpness from f4 to f11, and it almost looks like the wider open the lens is, the sharper it is. Calling the sweet spot is not easy, but I'd say it's f5. After f11, there's a linear decline in sharpness. At higher f-stop values, there is increasingly more diffraction to soften the image. The graph at 35mm is similar to the previous one, but f5 stands out a little better as the sweet spot relative to the smaller f-stops. f4 is now clearly lower, about the same as f9. Although f5 looks better now, so does f6.4. So the sweet spot is somewhere between f5 and f6.4. Moving on to 50mm, the graph looks like a flat mountain with a summit at f9. The plateau between f5 and f11 is all looking good. Now f4 is at the same level as f16. The telephoto end at 80mm is kind of similar to the 50mm graph, but f4 and f4.5 are as low as f22 this time. The overall sharpness seems to be the highest at f10, but f5 through f11 all look very good. Note that we cannot directly compare absolute values across different focal lengths because changing the focal length also changes the shooting distance and magnification. So we can only compare the shapes of the graphs. And here they all are once again in a single graph. This is the overall table with the sweet spots and best usable ranges. The main take-home messages are: first, the lens likes it best between f5 and f11. And second, if you're under 35mm, then f4 is a good and sharp choice. Above that focal length, use f5 as your minimum value. Let's next look at center sharpness. For this, I cut out the central 900 by 600 pixel region and measured the sharpness values of this fragment. Again, I was using standardized values. Remember that now we're looking at the region in the photos where I focused. This must be the sharpest region of the photo. The 16mm and 23mm graphs look very similar. For center sharpness, lower f-stop values generally produce the sharpest results. Why is that? I suspect the main reason is that the lens focuses more accurately when it is wide open. I've seen this in my Fuji XF 18 to 55 video. Please see the link below. Secondly, at higher f-stops you get diffraction, which is not good for sharpness. Also in this test, lower f-stop values resulted in faster shutter speeds. And although I used a good tripod, a timer and the electronic shutter, it is still better for photos to use a shorter shutter speed. At 35mm, the center sharpness has a plateau between f4 and f5, and then there is a steady decline in sharpness after that. This is the comparison of the 50mm and 80mm focal lengths. At 50mm, we have a plateau between f5 and f9. At 80mm focal length, the plateau starts to fall apart, and f5 seems to be the best. Again, please note that we cannot compare the absolute values of these two lines, we can only compare their shapes. This is the summary table with the sharpest spots and the best usable ranges. I think the main take-home messages are: first of all, for the absolute best center sharpness, lower f-stop values are better. And this is especially true if you're under 35mm focal length. If you use longer focal lengths, then f5 never fails. And secondly, if your goal is maximum center sharpness, there is little reason to go above f8. Lastly, let's look at corner sharpness. For this, I cut out the 900 by 600 pixel fragment from the upper left corner of the photos and measured its sharpness. Here are the results. The 16mm and 23mm graphs have the shape of a mountain with no clear best value. The good usable ranges are between f5 and f13, although I suspect f13 looks good because at this f-stop the depth of field is already so deep that some of the out-of-focus issues that originate from the fact that we focused in the middle may be compensated by the greater depth of field. The sharpest values appear between f8 and f10 for both focal lengths. At 35mm, the range between f5 and f10 looks good. The shape of the graph looks less symmetrical than before. Comparing the 50mm and 80mm focal lengths, we see big differences. The 50mm graph looks like a mountain with a distinct peak at f9. Sharpness falls off rather suddenly on both sides. The 80mm graph goes back to a more traditional shape and looks like it has a sweet spot around f10. At this focal length, the loss of sharpness after f10 is quite mild. In summary, whatever focal length you use, the corner sharpness is best between f5 and f11. Choose f8 or f9 as the single best value for each focal length. As the very last exercise, we can divide our standardized sharpness values for the center of the image by those for the corner of the image. Very broadly speaking, as you open up the lens, the greater the difference between center and corner sharpness, in favor of the center. Only the 50mm graph stands out. Here, the best ratio is seen at f5. So what can I say to summarize it all? The most general advice for the best overall sharpness is to stay between f5 and f10. But the lens surprised me today in several ways. It has the best center sharpness at lower f-stop values, sometimes even at f4. I was also expecting the lens to gradually change its properties between 16 and 80mm, but the behavior is not gradual. The 50mm focal length stands out with its clearer sweet spot. In general, the 16mm and 23mm focal lengths are similar. At those wider angle focal lengths, it is perfectly okay to use the lens wide open. The properties of the lens change at 35mm and not necessarily in a linear fashion. Remember that these results apply to the camera's JPEG output. RAW files processed with different software may produce slightly different results. I hope you enjoyed the information I generated for the Fuji XF 16 to 80mm lens, and you might consider subscribing to my channel and leaving a like. Let me know in the comments what you have discovered about the behavior of this lens and whether you agree with me. Thank you so much for watching. See you again soon. Goodbye.